So we will take up the book again, and this time we are at the very beginning. As you know, I skipped because Morya wanted to get some very basic facts down the last time. So I've talked to a few people who would like to hear every word read. So I think we should do that and not rush with this book because it is too important. So in my book, I'm on Chapter 1, The Existence of the Masters, General Considerations, and my page number is 3. This is recorded somewhat in the way of the last century, where we're only talking about perfected men throughout the book. That's quite all right, because we understand the principle of the spiritual masculine rising in us. And we are certain that there have been great women of attainment down through the centuries as well. So, the existence of perfected men is one of the most important of the many new facts which Theosophy puts before us. It follows logically from the other great theosophical teachings of karma and evolution by reincarnation. As we look round us, we see men obviously at all stages of their evolution, some who in one way or another are in advance of others. Since that is so, there may well be others who are very much further advanced. Indeed, if men are steadily growing better and better through a long series of successive lives, tending towards a definite goal, there should certainly be some who have already reached that goal. Some of us in the process of that development have already succeeded in unfolding some of those higher senses which are latent in every man and will be the heritage of all in the future. And by means of those senses, we are enabled to see the ladder of evolution extending far above us as well as far below us, and we can also see that there are men standing upon every rung of that ladder. It's like we are climbing Jacob's ladder. There is a considerable amount of direct testimony to the existence of these perfected men, whom we call masters. But I think that the first step which each one of us should take is to make certain that there must be such men. Only as a later step will it follow that those with whom we have come into contact belong to that class. The historical records of every nation are full of the doings of men of genius in all different departments of human activity. Men who in their special lines of work and ability have stood far above the rest, indeed so far that at times, and probably more often than we know, their ideals were utterly beyond the comprehension of the people, so that not only the work that they may have done has been lost to mankind, but their very names even have not been preserved. It has been said that the history of every nation could be written in the biography of a few individuals, and that it is always the few towering above the rest who initiate the great forward steps in art, music, literature, science, philosophy, philanthropy, statecraft, and religion. They stand high sometimes in love of God and their fellow men as great saints and philanthropists, sometimes in understanding of man and nature as great philosophers, sages, and scientists, sometimes in work for humanity as great liberators and reformers. Looking at these men and realizing how high they stand among humanity, how far they have gone in human evolution, is it not logical to say that we cannot see the bounds of human attainment, and that there may well have been, and even now may be, men far further developed even than they, men great in spirituality as well as knowledge or artistic power, men complete as regards human perfection, men precisely such as the adepts or supermen, whom some of us have had the inestimable privilege to encounter. This galaxy of human genius that enriches and beautifies the pages of history is at the same time the glory and the hope of all mankind. For we know that these greater ones are the forerunners of the rest, and that they flash out as beacons, as veritable light bearers. to show us the path which we must tread if we wish to reach the glory which shall presently be revealed. We have long accepted the doctrine of the evolution of the forms in which dwells the divine life. Here is the complementary and far greater idea of the evolution of that life itself, showing that the very reason for that wondrous development of higher and higher forms is that the ever-swelling life needs them in order to express itself. So here you have that interchange of the figure eight, this tremendous action of the figure eight, where the higher life needs us and we need the higher life. Forms are born and die, forms grow, decay, and break. But the spirit grows on eternally, ensouling those forms, and developing by means of experience gained in and through them. And as each form has served its turn and is outgrown, it is cast aside that another and better form may take its place. Behind the evolving form burgeons out ever the life eternal, the life divine. The life of God permeates the whole of nature, which is but the many-colored cloak which he has donned. It is he who lives in the beauty of the flower, in the strength of the tree, in the swiftness and grace of the animal, as well as in the heart and soul of man. It is because his will is evolution that all life everywhere is pressing onward and upward, and it is therefore that the existence of perfected men at the end of this long line of ever-unfolding power and wisdom and love is the most natural thing in the world. Everything that opposes power, wisdom, and love is the antithesis of the Great White Brotherhood. Even beyond them, beyond our sight and our comprehension, stretches a vista of still greater glory. Some hint of that we may endeavor to give later, but it is useless to speak of it now. The logical consequence of all this is that there must be perfected men, and there are not wanting signs of the existence of such men in all ages, who instead of leaving the world entirely to pursue a life of their own in the divine or superhuman kingdoms, have remained in touch with humanity through love of it, to assist its evolution in beauty and love and truth, to help, as it were, to cultivate the perfect man. Just as here and there we find a botanist who has special love for plants and glories in the production of a perfect orange or a perfect rose. So the introduction of this book is clear that if there are not perfected men and women, high souls, then we have no measurement for ourselves. No man knoweth the measure of himself. But because we know that they are perfected beings, because we have touched the hem of the garments of the ascended masters who have spoken through us, we know that there is a fulfillment that is before us. We know that we are where we are, and we approximate our self-worth, so to speak. We measure ourselves, and yet we cannot measure ourselves against the infinite. So this is a bit of logic for those who have logical minds, that there must be perfected men and women, otherwise this whole world would be a chaotic place. So everyone is on a different rung, and for attainments at one level, we may go very high, and for other levels, we may catch our robes at very low levels, and therefore we must detach ourselves from those lower vibrations and experiences. So we all have greatness in us because there are great beings above us. So that is the logic of this teaching. We have greatness. The question is, how much greatness? How much greatness do we really have? Well, we will never really know until we reach a plane of the absolute, so that there is an absolute measuring rod whereby we might know it. So in this stage, we are kept somewhat in the dark, but not entirely. 100 years after this book is written, we have the violet flame. Saint Germain is commencing the age of Aquarius. So things have moved like lightning in a single century of the adept's presence in the world. So it is very comforting to realize this, that there are those who have made it, that there are those beneath us on the ladder of life, there are those above us, and if we keep ascending on the scale that we have been taught by the masters to accept as something that we must go for if we are to succeed, then we have the sense that yes, one day we will arrive at that place of being perfected. So I like this opening to this book for this very reason, because it gives us the backdrop, where we've come from, where are we going, who has gone before us, who has been left behind. And those left behind are those who tend to veer off the path into the path of the fallen ones. So my book has a heading on page 5, The Testimony of the Religions. The records of every great religion show the presence of such supermen, so full of the divine life, that again and again they have been taken as the very representatives of God himself. In every religion, especially at its founding, has such an one appeared, and in many cases more than one. The Hindus have their great avataras, or divine incarnations, such as Sri Krishna, Sri Shankaracharya, and the Lord Gautama Buddha, whose religion has spread over the Far East, and a great galaxy of rishis, of saints, of teachers, and these great ones took interest not only in awakening men's spiritual natures, but also in all affairs that made for their well-being on earth. All who belong to the Christian world know, or ought to know, much about the great succession of prophets and teachers and saints in their own dispensation, and that in some way, perhaps not clearly understood, their supreme teacher, the Christ himself, was and is man as well as God. Jesus was man as well as God. And all the earlier religions, decadent as some of them may be amid the decay of nations, down even to those of primitive tribes of men, show as outstanding features the existence of supermen, helpers in every way of the childlike people among whom they dwelt. An enumeration of these interesting and valuable as it is would take us too far aside from our present purpose. So make sure you write down in a good place in your book, I know the masters are there, and I know I can become like them. That is the real purpose of this introduction. We can do what they have done. Recent evidence. There is much direct and recent evidence for the existence of these great ones. In my earlier days, I never needed any such evidence because I was fully persuaded, as a result of my studies, that there must be such people. To believe that there were such glorified men seemed perfectly natural, and my only desire was to meet them face to face. Yet there are many who reasonably enough want to know what evidence there is. There is a considerable amount of personal testimony. Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, the co-founders of the Theosophical Society, Dr. Annie Besant, and I myself, all of us have seen some of these great ones. And many other members of the society have also been privileged to see one or two of them, and there is ample testimony in what all these people have written. It is sometimes objected that those who saw them or fancied that they did so may have been dreaming or perhaps deluded. The chief reason, I think, for the possibility of such a suggestion is that we have very rarely seen the adepts at a time when both they and we were in our physical bodies. In the early days of the society, when only Madame Blavatsky had developed higher faculties, the masters not infrequently materialized themselves so that all could see them, and showed themselves thus physically on various occasions. You will find many records of such happenings in the earlier history of our society, but of course the Great One, so showing himself, was not in his physical body, but in a materialized form. Many of us habitually and constantly see them during our sleep. We go out in our astral bodies or in the mental body according to our development, and we visit them and see them in their physical bodies. but we are not at that time in ours, and that is why on the physical plane people tend to be skeptical about such experiences. Men object, but in these cases either you who saw them were out of the physical body and may have been dreaming or deluded, or those who appeared to you came phenomenally and then disappeared again. So how do you know that they were what you suppose them to be? There are a few cases in which both the adept and the person who saw him were in the physical body. It happened with Madame Blavatsky. I have heard her testify that she lived for some time in a monastery in Nepal, where she saw 3 of our masters constantly in their physical vehicles. Some of them have come down more than once from their mountain retreats into India in their physical bodies. Colonel Olcott spoke of having seen 2 of them on those occasions. He had met the Master Morya and also the Master Kuthumi. Damodar K. Mavlankar, whom I knew in 1884, had encountered the Master Kuthumi in his physical body. There was the case of S. Ramaswamy Iyer, a gentleman whom I knew well in those days, who had the experience of meeting the Master Morya physically, and has written an account of that meeting, which I shall quote later. And there was the case of Mr. W. T. Brown of the London Lodge, who also was privileged to meet one of the great ones under similar conditions. There is also a vast amount of Indian testimony which has never been collected and sifted, mainly because those to whom these experiences came were so thoroughly persuaded of the existence of supermen and of the possibility of meeting them that they did not regard any individual case as worthy of record. Personal experience. I myself can report 2 occasions on which I have met a master, both of us being in the physical vehicle. One of them was the adept to whom the name of Jupiter was assigned in the book The Lives of Alcyone, who greatly assisted in the writing of portions of Madame Blavatsky's famous work, Isis Unveiled, when that was being done in Philadelphia and New York. When I was living at Adyar, he was so kind as to request my revered teacher, Swami T. Subbarao, to bring me to call upon him. Obeying his summons, we journeyed to his house and were most graciously received by him. After a long conversation of the deepest interest, we had the honor of dining with him, Brahmin though he be, and spent the night and part of the next day under his roof. In that case, it will be admitted that there could be no question of illusion. The other adept whom I had the privilege of encountering physically was the Master Comte de Saint-Germain, called sometimes the Prince Rakazi. I met him under quite ordinary circumstances without any previous appointment, and as though by chance, walking down the Corso in Rome, dressed just as any Italian gentleman might be. He took me up into the gardens on the Pincian Hill, and we sat for more than an hour talking about the society and its work, or perhaps I should rather say that he spoke and I listened, although when he asked questions, I answered. Other members of the Brotherhood I have seen under varying circumstances. My first encounter with one of them was in a hotel in Cairo. I was on my way out to India with Madame Blavatsky and some others, and we stayed in that city for a time. We all used to gather in Madame Blavatsky's room for work, and I was sitting on the floor cutting out and arranging for her a quantity of newspaper articles which she wanted. She sat at a table close by. Indeed, my left arm was actually touching her dress. The door of the room was in full sight, and it certainly did not open. But quite suddenly, without any preparation, there was a man standing almost between me and Madame Blavatsky, within touch of both of us. It gave me a great start, and I jumped up in some confusion. Madame Blavatsky was much amused and said, "If you do not know enough not to be startled at such a trifle as that, you will not get far in this occult work." I was introduced to the visitor, who was not then an adept but an arhat, which is 1 grade below that state. He has since become the Master Dwal Kul. Some months after that, the Master Morya came to us one day, looking exactly as though in a physical body. He walked through the room where I was in order to communicate with Madame Blavatsky, who was in her bedroom inside. That was the first time I had seen him plainly and clearly, for I had not then developed my latent senses sufficiently to remember what I saw in the subtle body. I saw the Master Kuthumi under similar conditions on the roof of our headquarters at Adyar. He was stepping over a balustrade as though he had just materialized from the empty air on the other side of it. I have also many times seen the Master Jwal Khul on the roof in the same way. This would, I suppose, be considered less certain evidence, since the adepts came as apparitions do. But as I have since learned to use my higher vehicles freely and to visit these great ones in that way, I can testify that those who in the early years of the society came and materialized for us are the same men whom I have often seen living in their own homes. People have suggested that I and others who have the same experience may be but dreaming, since these visits take place during the sleep of the body. I can only reply that it is a remarkably consistent dream, extending in my own case over 40 years, and that it has been dreamt simultaneously by a large number of people. Those who wish to collect evidence about these matters, and it is quite reasonable that they should wish to do so, should turn to the earlier literature of the Society. They could have heard from Dr. Besant how many of the great ones she had seen on different occasions, and there are many of our members who will bear witness without hesitation that they have seen a master. What we are experiencing here is that the masters, whatever bodies they are wearing, apart from the physical body, are just beyond the veil. It's as though you could take the veil of a wedding dress and draw it aside, and you would be face to face with an adept. So close are the masters to us. And we need to remember that. It's very important. When we have our quiet moments, our meditation, when we retire, when we get up in the morning, to make sure we strengthen the tie to the one or several or many masters to whom we pay allegiance, give obeisance, and from whom we learn and are taught and are disciplined. So this very closeness, seeing the masters, having had physical connections with them, it's just as close as one layer of a wedding veil. And we need to think in those terms, that they are not beyond some veil that we've been talking about for years, but that it's right here. It's almost, you could almost just close a curtain and you would see them face to face. It may be that in meditation they have seen his face and later have had definite proof that he is a real being. Much evidence may be found in Colonel Alcott's old diary leaves, and there is an interesting treatise called Do the Brothers Exist, written by Mr. A.O. Hume, a man who stood high in the civil service in India and worked much with our late Vice President, Mr. A.P. Sinnott. It was published in a book entitled Hints on Esoteric Theosophy. Mr. Hume, who was a skeptical Anglo-Indian with a legal mind, went into the question of the existence of the brothers, as the masters are also called because they belong to a great brotherhood, and also because they are the elder brothers of humanity, and even at that early date decided that he had overwhelming testimony that they did exist, and very much more evidence has accumulated since that book was published. The possession of extended vision and other faculties resulting from the unfolding of our latent powers has also brought within our constant experience the fact that there are other orders of beings than the human, some of whom rank alongside the adepts in a grade of existence higher than our own. We meet with some whom we call devas or angels, and with others whom we see to be far beyond ourselves in every respect. Since in the course of our development we have become able to communicate with the adepts, we have naturally asked them, with all reverence, how they have attained to that level. They tell us with one accord that no long time ago they stood where we stand now. That's one of the most important sentences you have to repeat to yourself for the rest of your life. that no long time ago they stood where we stand now. They have risen out of the ranks of ordinary humanity, and they have told us that we in time to come shall be as they are now, and that the whole system is a graded evolution of life, extending up and up further than we can follow it, even unto the Godhead itself. We find that as there are definite stages in the earlier evolution, the vegetable above the mineral, the animal above the vegetable, and the human above the animal, so in the same way the human kingdom has a definite end, a boundary at which it passes into a kingdom distinctly higher than itself. So this tells us where we are going, when we may consider that we might enter into this kingdom that is distinctly higher than itself. That beyond men there are the supermen. In the study of this system of evolution, we have learnt that there are in every man 3 great divisions: body, soul, and spirit. And each of these is capable of further subdivision. That is the definition which was given by St. Paul 2,000 years ago. The spirit or monad is the breath of God, for the word spirit means breath from the Latin spiro. The divine spark, which is truly the man, though it may more accurately be described as hovering over man as we know him. We think of the divine spark being centered in the secret chamber of the heart. This writing says that that divine spark is hovering over us. So we can think what we will about those 2 versions. I certainly do, and I know many of you feel the flame in your heart and that divine spark. But there might be a divine spark that is something a little bit different than our version of the divine spark that is also over us, perhaps such as our Holy Christ self. The scheme of its evolution is that it should descend into matter, and through its descent obtain definiteness and accuracy in material detail. Now that sentence alone tells us why we are here. The scheme of our evolution is that it should descend into matter, which we've all done. We can tell we're all in the same place right now, right? We've all descended into matter, and through its descent, we must obtain definiteness, accuracy in material detail. In other words, to master the material universe with the greatest scientific discoveries and the greatest advancement that technology has thus far brought into the world. That is something we must do. So far as we are able to see, this monad, which is a spark of the divine fire, cannot descend as far as our present level, cannot directly reach this physical plane in which we are now thinking and working, probably because the rates of its vibration and those of physical matter differ too widely, so that there must be intermediate states and conditions. On what plane of nature that divine spark originally exists, we do not know, for it is far above, out of our reach. The lowest manifestation of it, which might be called a reflection of it, descends into the lowermost of the cosmic planes as described in a textbook of theosophy. We speak commonly of 7 planes of existence, which are subdivisions or subplanes of the lowest cosmic plane, called in our books the prakritic, meaning the physical plane of the cosmos. The monad can descend to the second of these subplanes, which we consequently call the monadic plane, but it does not seem able to penetrate lower than this. In order to obtain the necessary contact with still denser matter, it puts down part of itself through 2 whole planes, and that fragment is what we call the ego or soul. So if the monad can only descend to the second of these subplanes, then what should our desire be? Our desire should be to rise to that level of the monad, to the second of these subplanes, whatever these subplanes are. In other words, if God cannot lower himself any further than our etheric body, than our Holy Christ self, then what we are about is to raise ourselves to the level where we should become one with those eternal beings of light. To the level that they have descended, we must reach them. So we should ever be reaching for that contact and that fusion, and finally that becoming one with the presence of God. Perhaps it is the causal body, which they're referring to as monad. Maybe it's the I am presence and the causal body. Whatever it is, we have to rise to its level. And for whatever reason, whether karmic, whether we are here to lead crusades on behalf of humanity, whatever reason we are in embodiment, the underlying daily intensity and fervor that we must have is to reach the level where we can commune with that part of ourself that has eternal life. And that part of ourself that has immortality is the Holy Christ self. So if we aren't reaching for that daily, we have all kinds of exercises we can do, reaching exercises. We have to exercise the four lower bodies to rise to that level, and then exclude from ourselves the mundaneness, the low vibrations that are all around us in the world. And we exclude that by the tube of light, by our decrees, by our calls, but also being very fastidious in what we take in, books, music, movies, anything that's bombarding us. We have to realize that that's not part of the world we're going to, and our goal is to get there. So each of us has to decide, what am I going to let go of that I really don't need, that is stopping me from rising every day, even to the feet of my Holy Christ self. If I can just touch those feet each day, then I will know that I have touched eternity. And so for another 24 hours, I am in eternity with the immortal one, the Holy Christ self. So the way this book is written, which is very unique in itself, in its style of the last century and so forth, puts all of these very interesting ideas and concepts into our minds and hearts. And we continually feel like windows are opening, and we can see the blue sky, and we can see the clouds, and we sense the fact, this is where we're going. This is where we're going, into that presence, into that infinity. So the divine spirit above us merely hovers over us. So let's say the divine spirit is the Holy Christ self and the I am presence, unless you sense that your Holy Christ self is one and sealed with you. If so, you would be a walking Christ in the earth. But that is entirely possible to you if you make that your goal. The divine spirit above us merely hovers over us. The soul, which is a small and partial representation of it, it is as though the monad puts down a finger of fire, and the end of that finger is the soul, cannot descend below the higher part of the mental plane, which is the fifth plane, counting downwards, the physical being the seventh and the lowest. Now this is typical 19th century writing, where the sentences just go on. So I'm going to reread this paragraph to you. The divine spirit above us merely hovers over us, period. The soul, which is a small and partial representation of it, cannot descend below the higher part of the mental plane. It is as though the monad puts down a finger of fire, and the end of that finger is the soul. Then it goes on, is the fifth plane counting downwards, the physical being the seventh and lowest. And in order that it may reach a still lower level, it must in turn put down a small portion of itself, which becomes the personality that we know. So this personality, which each person commonly thinks to be himself, is in truth but the fragment of a fragment. I think that's the best they felt they could do with that information. You might want to sort it out yourself. All the evolution through the lower kingdoms is preparatory to the development of this human constitution. An animal, during its life on the physical plane, and for some time after that in the astral world, has a soul just as individual and separate as a man's. Now, Mark Prophet used to talk about group souls, but this is talking about that the animal has a soul just as individual and separate as a man's. But when the animal comes to the end of its astral life, that soul does not reincarnate again in a single body, but returns to a kind of reservoir of soul matter, called in our books a group soul. It is as though the group soul were a bucket of water supplying the need of several animals of the same kind, say, for example, 20 horses. When a horse is to be born from that group soul, it is as though one dipped a vessel into that bucket and brought it out full of water. During the life of that horse, all kinds of experiences come to him which modify his soul, from which he learns lessons, and these may be compared to various kinds of coloring matter cast into the vessel of water. When the horse dies, the water in the vessel is emptied back into the bucket, and the coloring matter which it has acquired spreads all through the whole bucket. When another horse is born from the same group soul, another vessel of water is filled from the bucket, but it will be obvious that it is impossible to take out in it exactly the same drops of water which constituted the soul of the previous horse. I think it's important to read this because, by and by, you start assimilating it and things come to you. So I think it's just well worth our reading to go through it. And we'll gain enlightenment depending on the state of our minds at the time. So the next paragraph is a little bit more illuminating. When an animal has developed far enough to become human, this is very exciting. When an animal has developed far enough to become human, that means that at the end of his life, his soul is not poured back again into the group soul, but remains as a separate entity. And now a very curious but very beautiful fate befalls him. The soul matter, the water in the vessel, becomes itself a vehicle for something much higher, and instead of acting as a soul, it is itself ensouled. We have no exact analogy on the physical plane unless we think of pumping air into water under high pressure and thereby making it aerated water. If we accept that symbolism, the water which was previously the animal soul has now become the causal body of a man, and the air pumped into it is the ego of which I have spoken, that soul of man which is but a partial manifestation of the divine spirit. This descent of the ego is symbolized in ancient mythology by the Greek idea of the crater or cup, and by the medieval story of the Holy Grail, for the Grail or the cup is the perfected result of all that lower evolution into which is poured the wine of the divine life, so that the soul of man may be born. So as we have said, this which has previously been the animal soul becomes, in the case of man, what is called the causal body, which exists in the higher part of the mental plane as the permanent vehicle occupied by the ego or human soul. And all that has been learnt in its evolution is transferred to this new center of life. Mark has told us, and I think it has been told in the East, that sometimes people create such heavy crimes that they are sent into the body of animals, and they must work through their karma as animals. And so we know that that has come from various sources. So it's like all life is evolving. All life is making choices. Even as instinct, animals are making choices to care for their young, to prepare for winter, etc. So it's a great sense of the unity of all life, beginning with a single atom, if we should start from the beginning. The evolution of this soul consists in its gradual return to the higher level on the plane next below the monadic, carrying with it the result of its descent in the shape of experiences gained and qualities acquired. The physical body in all of us is fully developed, and because that is so, we are supposed to have conquered it, but it should be fully under the control of the soul. Among more developed men at the present day, it usually is so, though it may break away and run wild for a little at times. The astral body is also fully developed, but it is not yet by any means under perfect control. Even among the races to which we belong, there are many people who are the victims of their own emotions. Instead of being able to govern them perfectly, they too often allow themselves to be governed by them. They let their emotions run away with them, just as a wild horse may run away with its rider and take him into many places whereto he does not wish to go. We may take it then that in all the more developed men at the present day, the physical body is fully developed and fairly under control. The astral body is also fully developed, but not by any means under perfect control. The mental body is in process of unfoldment, but its growth is yet very far from complete. When these three bodies, the physical, the astral, and the mental, are entirely subordinate to the soul, the lower self will have been absorbed into the higher self, and the ego, the soul, will have dominated the man. Though the man is not yet perfect, the different vehicles are so far harmonized that they have but one aim. Up to this time, the soul has been slowly controlling the personal vehicles until they become one with it. But now the monad, in its turn, begins to dominate the soul. And there will presently come a time when, just as the personality and the soul have become one, the spirit and the soul will become one in their turn. This is the unification of the ego with the monad, and when that is achieved, the man has attained the object of his descent into matter. He has become the Superman or adept. So when we read this and we finally get through it, we do get the gist of it, and we do have a deep sense of what this is talking about. It is saying that in steps and in stages, we might go from an amoeba to what we are today in our physical evolution. And we build layer upon layer upon layer through how many hundreds of thousands of years, I do not know. So there is a science, there is a destiny, there is a promise, there is a goal, there is a reality that we can rely on, that is there for us. We just have to reach up and hold on to it, like you hold on to the thing in the subway so you don't fall down. And you're packed in there like sardines, and you're in that subway. And you just have to hold on because you know the train is going where you want to go. You'll get there, but you have to hang on, or you might get thrown off that wheel of life. Superhuman life is the next category. Now only for the first time does he enter upon his real life. For the whole of this stupendous process of evolution, through all the lower kingdoms and then through the human kingdom up to the attainment of adeptship, is but a preparation for the true life of the spirit, which begins only when man becomes more than man. When man becomes more than man. Don't you feel sometimes almost as if you're cramped in your body, and you know that there's more to you? There's that higher life, that inner life, that brooding spirit around you, and you begin to feel a prisoner of a body that has served you many incarnations of many bodies, and then you come to the place where you say, I've reached my limit. This ceiling is only 6 feet high. I can't even stand up in this room. It's like, I need another vessel. I need another vehicle. I need to enter into the realms of my immortality. So, a preparation for the true life of the spirit, the spirit, which begins only when man becomes more than man. How do we know when this day dawns? We will know. We know it. Humanity is the final class of the world school, and when a man has been trained therein, he passes out into the real life, the life of the glorified spirit, the life of the Christ. What that is, we know, but little as yet, though we see some of those who are sharing it. It has a glory and a splendor which is beyond all comparison, beyond our comprehension, and yet it is a vivid and living fact, and the attainment of it by every one of us is an absolute certainty from which we cannot escape even if we would. It almost sounds like predestination, but I don't think it's quite the intent of the author to say that. If we act selfishly, if we set ourselves against the current of evolution, we can delay our progress, but we cannot finally prevent it. We have to say, unless we choose the second death, unless we choose to extinguish our own candle. Having finished with human life, the perfected man usually drops his various material bodies, but he retains the power to take up any of them if he should need them in the course of his work. In the majority of cases, one who gains that level no longer needs a physical body. He no longer retains an astral, a mental, or even a causal body, but lives permanently at his higher level. Whenever for any purpose he needs to deal with a lower plane, he must take a temporary vehicle belonging to that plane, because only through the medium of its matter can he come into contact with those who live therein. If he wishes to talk to men physically, he must take a physical body. He must have at least a partial materialization, or he cannot speak. In the same way, if he wishes to impress our minds, he must draw around himself a mental body. Whenever he needs in his work to take a lower vehicle, he has the power to do so, but he holds it only temporarily. There are 7 lines of still further progress along which the perfect man can go, a list of which we shall give in a later chapter. Does anyone have questions or something to discuss?
What we're reading, is this similar to what Archangel Michael went through?
What were your first words?
And what we're reading at this time in regards to the evolutions and doing it with the group souls and how you have the possibility of going into a human soul. It came across to my mind with the story of Archangel Michael, how he was grass, and he came on to be an archangel. Is this something similar?
Have we used the term grass, or have we said he was an elemental?
Okay. A garden of?
Guarding, an elemental guarding a blade of grass. There's no question as we read through this that we are all going through our evolution from the beginning to our union with God. So this is what Mark Prophet said about Archangel Michael, and I don't doubt it. And it is just astounding to contemplate, to think how long it would take us to become who we are if we were simply guarding a blade of grass. Imagine the diligence it requires to stay with that.
Hi, beloved Mother. I would like to ask a question that has been in my heart for quite a long time. I would like to know, what does it mean to be a staff member? From a spiritual standpoint, as well as from the standpoint of a mission or dharma.
I think that we are all at a grade of discipleship. And becoming a staff member is a more secular term. You could be a staff member of a corporation anywhere in the world. Our sense of staff are those who uphold El Morya first and foremost, because he is our guru. He has given his life, his causal body, his precious jewel for us. He has laid down his life for Saint Germain and his cause. And El Morya is the one who sponsors all of us here. I know that students who come to Summit University are told that they should select a master, and that they of their preference. What I have been saying to them in the past summer is, El Morya is your sponsor, and you can select 2 other masters that you may wish to work with. But we cannot sidestep El Morya because we haven't resolved our psychology with our father or ourselves or this or that. So being a staff member in the very basic sense of the word is that we work here and we serve here. If you use the term Chila, then we desire to be bonded to our guru. First, we may be bonded to our guru with a lowercase Chila, and that may go on for many, many years. It can go on for embodiments. But by and by, one day, we will have the honor of having the title of Chila with an uppercase C. So the Arhats went through this. The adepts went through it. And they went through these cycles, and we see what they have become. And most places in the world, when you go and study, you go to university, you go to school, you go here, you go there, you take courses, you have a teacher. And we have the greatest teacher of all. And that teacher lays down his life for us. And that's something you don't find in the world. So this is community. It's Maitreya's Mystery School. And we are a part of those who call ourselves staff. And we have different levels of staff status depending on how long we've been here, what our service is, and when Morya chooses to advance us. Do you have any more questions regarding this?
No, I wanted to clarify this because since I was 14, I wanted to become a nun and join a religious order. And so since I found, by the grace of God, this community, I just felt the same way, that there was more to staff than just work and support the physical structure of the organization, basically. There was more to it, like a spiritual mission.
We have our spiritual mission. First and foremost, we are called to balance our threefold flame so that it can take off. It's just like an airplane can't take off if the propellers aren't equal. We really can't take off if we don't work with our threefold flame and balance it. And we shouldn't be stubborn about it. We should be very quick and joyous to realize that we can bring that threefold flame into absolute balance. Absolute balance. And when we do that, that really is the mark of the beginning of the bud of the flower to open and to show us that the threefold flame is the spark of eternal life. And we endow everything we do with that divine spark in ourselves. And we can do that before we balance our threefold flame. It just means that we take off when we do balance it.
Well, I'm so grateful to be here, Mother, and serve you and Morya, and I'm just profoundly grateful.
I'm very grateful that you're here too. Okay, here we are, the Brotherhood of Adepts. The world is guided and directed to a large extent by a brotherhood of adepts, to which our masters belong. Theosophical students make all sorts of mistakes about them. They often regard them as a great monastic community, all living together in some secret place. They suppose them sometimes to be angels, and many of our students have thought that they were all Indian, or that they all resided in the Himalayas. None of these hypotheses is true. There is a great brotherhood, and its members are in constant communication with one another. But their communication is on higher planes, and they do not necessarily live together. As part of their work, some of these great brothers, whom we call masters of the wisdom, are willing to take pupil apprentices and teach them, but they form only a small section of the mighty body of perfected men. So, if you bother the master enough, if you are after him every day, if you tell him you must be an apprentice or you will never be happy, he may take you on. In the meantime, you do all the things that you know that ascended masters love to see their Chilas do. And I'm sure you can enumerate them. As will be explained later on, there are 7 types of men, for everyone belongs to one of the 7 rays into which the great wave of evolving life is distinctly divided. It would seem that one adept on each of the rays is appointed to attend to the training of beginners, and all those who are coming along his particular ray of evolution pass through his hands. No one below the rank of adept is permitted to assume full responsibility for a novice, though those who have been Chilas, disciples, for a number of years are often employed as deputies and receive the privilege of helping and advising promising young aspirants. These older pupils are gradually being trained for their future work when they in turn shall become adepts, and they are learning to take more and more of the routine work off the hands of their masters so that the latter may be set free for higher labors which only they can undertake. The preliminary selection of candidates for discipleship is now left to a large extent in the hands of these older workers, and the candidates are temporarily linked with such representatives rather than directly with the great adepts. But the pupils and the master are so wonderfully one that perhaps this is almost a distinction without a difference. The power of the adept. The powers of the adept are indeed many and wonderful, but they all follow in natural sequence from faculties which we ourselves possess. We possess these faculties. They may be latent, like a seed that didn't bloom this year. But we possess the same faculties. They simply have to be developed, and we will be placing our feet in the footprints of our masters. It is only that they have these faculties in a very much greater degree. I think that the outstanding characteristic of the adept, as compared with ourselves, is that he looks upon everything from an absolutely different point of view. For there is in him nothing whatever of the thought of self, which is so prominent in the majority of men. The adept has eliminated the lower self and is living not for self, but for all, and yet in a way that only he can really understand. That all is truly himself also. He includes himself in the all. He has reached that stage in which there is no flaw in his character, nothing of a thought or feeling for a personal, separated self, and his only motive is that of helping forward evolution, of working in harmony with the Logos who directs it. Perhaps the next most prominent characteristic is his all-round development. We are all of us imperfect. None has attained the highest level in any line. And even the great scientist or the great saint has usually reached his excellence in one thing only, and there remain other sides of his nature not yet unfolded. All of us possess some germ of all the different characteristics, but always they are partially awakened, and one much more than another. An adept, however, is an all-round man, a man for all seasons, a man whose devotion and love and sympathy and compassion are perfect, while at the same time his intellect is something far grander than we can as yet realize, and his spirituality is wonderful and divine. He stands out above and beyond all men whom we know because of the fact that he is fully developed. I believe that the various systems of education that we are pursuing, from Montessori to the very present one that many of you attended last evening, that in all of these areas of prenatal and postnatal education, what we do as mothers and fathers, stimulating the environment and teaching our children and speaking to them in the womb, all of this awakens faculties that would die on the vine before they were even able to be of age where anyone thought that they could use those faculties. This is the great revolution in education. This is the great open door, in my mind, whereby we can receive children and give them such love, such joy, such training, such immersion in their own self-esteem, in how they build, how they become the builders, how they internalize their Christhood. We will have the privilege as staff members here in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years to observe the many children who have come through here who are totally different human beings because we have taken the avant-garde methods from people around the world, put them together, and given them to these precious children. Now here is the next chapter, the physical bodies of the masters, their appearance. Okay, here is the description of the masters. This is really quite exciting, I think. There has been among theosophical students a great deal of vagueness and uncertainty about the masters, so perhaps it may help us to realize how natural their lives are and how there is an ordinary physical side to them, if I say a few words about the daily life and appearance of some of them. There is no one physical characteristic by which an adept can be infallibly distinguished from other men, but he always appears impressive, noble, dignified, holy, and serene, and anyone meeting him could hardly fail to recognize that he was in the presence of a remarkable man. He is the strong but silent man, speaking only when he has a definite object in view, to encourage, to help, or to warn. Yet he is wonderfully benevolent and full of a keen sense of humor always of a kindly order, used never to wound, but always to lighten the troubles of life. The Master Morya once said that it is impossible to make progress on the occult path without a sense of humor, and certainly all the adepts whom I have seen have possessed that qualification. Most of them are distinctly fine-looking men. Their physical bodies are practically perfect, for they live in complete obedience to the laws of health. And above all, they never worry about anything. All they have to do is dematerialize if any burdens come along, you know. We'll clean up the rest, won't we? All their karma has long been exhausted, and thus the physical body is as perfect an expression of the ogoides, or glorified body of the ego, as the limitations of the physical plane will allow. So that not only is the present body of an adept usually splendidly handsome, but also any new body that he may take in a subsequent incarnation is likely to be an almost exact reproduction of the old one, allowing for racial and family differences because there is nothing to modify it. This freedom from karma gives them, when for any reason they choose to take new bodies, entire liberty to select a birth in any country or race that may be convenient for the work that they have to do, and thus the nationality of the particular bodies which they happen to be wearing at any given time is not of primary importance. To know that a certain man is an adept, it would be necessary to see his causal body, for in that his development would show by its greatly increased size and by a special arrangement of its colors into concentric spheres, such as is indicated to some extent in the illustration of the causal body of an arhat in the book Man, Visible and Invisible. Remember, we are talking about adepts who are not ascended masters. As you know, it is very rare, and we do know the case of Elijah reincarnating as John the Baptist. But when they are ascended, there is not this entering into bodies. And so, although they seem to be at a greater distance from us, the ascended masters are as near as heartbeat and as close as our own joy flame allows. The masters don't like to be around any of us when our energies drop below the level of the heart and are negative in vibration. So if you want to keep the masters walking and talking with you, as we see in the pictures of angels and archangels walking with men, the surest thing we must do is not go into some kind of a blue funk and all of our energies go below the heart, and we're not of usefulness to ourselves or to the masters or to anyone, and basically we're losing ground and losing time. So, a ravine in Tibet. There is a certain valley, or rather ravine, in Tibet where three of these great ones, the Master Morya, the Master Kuthumi, and the Master Jwal Kul, are living at the present time. The Master Jwal Kul, at Madame Blavatsky's request, once made for her a precipitated picture of the mouth of that ravine, and the illustration given herewith is a reproduction of a photograph of that. Do you all have the photograph? You can see a tiny little El Morya on a horse on the left, and you can see Jwal Kul turning his back to us. The original, which is precipitated on silk, is preserved in the shrine room of the headquarters of the Theosophical Society at Adyar. On the left of the picture, the Master Morya is seen on horseback near the door of his house. The dwelling of the Master Kuthumi does not appear in the picture, being higher up the valley, round the bend on the right. Madame Blavatsky begged the Master Jwal Kul to put himself into the picture. He at first refused, but eventually added himself as a small figure standing in the water and grasping a pole, but with his back to the spectator. This original is faintly tinted, the colors being blue, green, and black. It bears the signature of the artist, the nickname Guy Benjamin, which he bore in his youth in the early days of the society, long before he reached adeptship. The scene is evidently taken early in the day, as the morning mists are still clinging to the hillsides. The Master Morya and Kuthumi occupy houses on opposite sides of this narrow ravine. Each time I read this, getting into where they live and where their bed is and where the organ is and all these things, I'm smiling the whole time I'm reading this, because I feel like they've included me in this in their previous life when they were in physical embodiment and seeing people. I don't know why this happens, but I just start grinning when I get to this page. The masters Morya and Kuthumi occupy houses on opposite sides of this narrow ravine, the slopes of which are covered with pine trees. Paths run down the ravine past their houses and meet at the bottom where there is a little bridge. Close to the bridge, a narrow door, which may be seen on the left at the bottom of the picture, leads to a system of vast subterranean halls containing an occult museum of which the Master Kuthumi is the guardian on behalf of the Great White Brotherhood. This gets very exciting. The contents of this museum are of the most varied character. They appear to be intended as a kind of illustration of the whole process of evolution. For example, there are here the most lifelike images of every type of man which has existed on this planet from the commencement, from gigantic loose-jointed Lemurians to pygmy remains of even earlier and less human races. Models in alto relievo show all the variations of the surface of the earth, the conditions before and after the great cataclysms which have changed it so much. Huge diagrams illustrate the migrations of the different races of the world and show exactly how far they spread from their respective sources. Other similar diagrams are devoted to the influence of the various religions of the world, showing where each one was practiced in original purity and where it became mingled with and distorted by the remains of other religions. Amazingly lifelike statues perpetuate the physical appearance of certain of the great leaders and teachers of long-forgotten races, and various objects of interest connected with important and even unnoticed advancements in civilization are preserved for the examination of posterity. Original manuscripts of incredible antiquity and of priceless value are here to be seen. A manuscript, for example, written by the hand of the Lord Buddha himself in his final life as Prince Siddhartha, and another written by the Lord Christ during his birth in Palestine. Here is kept that marvelous original of the Book of Darshan, which Madame Blavatsky describes in the opening of the Secret Doctrine. Here, too, are strange scripts from other worlds than ours. Animal and vegetable forms are also depicted, some few of which are known to us as fossils, though most of them are unimagined by our modern science. Actual models of some of the great cities of remote and forgotten antiquity are here for the study of the pupils. All statues and models are vividly colored exactly as were the originals, and we may note that the collection here was intentionally put together at the time in order to represent to posterity the exact stages through which the evolution or civilization of the time was passing, so that instead of mere incomplete fragments, such as our museums so often present to us, we have in all cases an intentionally educative series of presentations. There we find models of all the kinds of machinery which the different civilizations have evolved, and also there are elaborate and abundant illustrations of the types of magic in use at the various periods of history. Isn't that an odd thing? The types of magic. In other words, apparently humanity has been attempting to manipulate life through magic for eons and eons. It seems to be a favorite pastime here. In the vestibule leading to these vast halls are kept the living images of those pupils of the Masters Morya and Kuthumi who happen at the time to be on probation, which I will describe later. These images are ranged round the walls like statues and are perfect representations of the pupils concerned. It is not probable, however, that they are visible to physical eyes, for the lowest matter entering into their composition is etheric. Near the bridge there is also a small temple with turrets of somewhat Burmese form to which a few villagers go to make offering of fruit and flowers and to burn camphor and recite the Panchasila. A rough and uneven track leads down the valley by the side of the stream. From either of the two houses of the masters, the other house can be seen. They are both above the bridge, but both cannot be seen from it since the ravine bends round. If we follow the path up the valley past the house of the Master Kuthumi, it will lead us to a large pillar of rock beyond which, the ravine bending round again, it passes out of sight. Some distance further on the ravine opens out into a plateau on which there is a lake in which tradition tells us Madame Blavatsky used to bathe. And it is said that she found it very cold. She had a good physical body. The valley is sheltered and faces south, and though the surrounding country is under snow during the winter, I do not remember having seen any near the master's houses. These houses are of stone, very heavily and strongly built. So you see, as we move on, we will have a circle of green, and beyond it there'll be snow, all kinds of inclement weather, and right here there'll be this beautiful green valley, right? The house of the Master Kuthumi. The house of the Master Kuthumi is divided into two parts by a passageway running straight through it, as will be seen from our diagram. Do you have it? Which shows the ground plan of the southern half of the house. On entering the passage, the first door on the right leads into the principal room of the house in which the master usually sits. It is large and lofty, about 50 feet by 30 feet, in many ways more like a hall than a room, and it occupies the whole of the front of the house on that side of the passage. Behind that large room are two other nearly square rooms, one of which he uses as a library and the other as a bedroom. That completes that side or division of the house, which is apparently reserved for the master's personal use and is surrounded by a broad veranda. The other side of the house on the left of the passage as one enters seems to be divided into smaller rooms and offices of various kinds. We have had no opportunity of closely examining them, but we have noted that just across the passage from the bedroom is a well-appointed bathroom. The large room is well supplied with windows both along the front and the end, so well that on entering one gets the impression of an almost continuous outlook, and under the windows runs a long seat. There is also a somewhat unusual feature for that country, a large open fireplace in the middle of the wall opposite the front windows. This is so arranged as to heat all three rooms, and it has a curious hammered iron cover, which I am told is unique in Tibet. Over the opening of that fireplace is a mantelpiece, and nearby stands the master's armchair, a very old carved wood, hollowed to fit the sitter so that for it no cushions are required. Dotted about the room are tables and settees or sofas, mostly without backs, and in one corner is the keyboard of the master's organ. The ceiling is perhaps 20 feet high and is very handsome with its fine carved beams, which descend into ornamental points where they meet one another and divide the ceiling into oblong sections. An arched opening with a pillar in the center, somewhat in the Gothic style but without glass, opens into the study, and a similar window opens into the bedroom. This latter room is very simply furnished. There is an ordinary bed, swung hammock-like between two carved wooden supports fixed in the wall, one of these carved to imitate a lion's head and the other an elephant's, and the bed, when not in use, folds up against the wall. The library is a fine room containing thousands of volumes. Running out from the wall, there are tall bookshelves filled with books in many languages, a number of them being modern European works, and at the top there are open shelves for manuscripts. The master is a great linguist, and besides being a fine English scholar, has a thorough knowledge of French and German. This is all about Kuthumi. The library also contains a typewriter which was presented to the master by one of his pupils. Of the master's family I know but little. There is a lady, evidently a pupil, who he calls sister. Whether she is actually his sister or not, I do not know. She might possibly be a cousin or a niece. She looks much older than he, but that would not make the relationship improbable, as he has appeared of about the same age for a long time. There's hope, right? She resembles him to a certain extent, and once or twice, when there have been gatherings, she has come and joined the party, though her principal work seems to be look after the household keeping and manage the servants. Among the latter are an old man and his wife who have been for a long time in the master's service. They do not know anything of the real dignity of their employer, but regard him as a very indulgent and gracious patron, and naturally they benefit greatly by being in his service. The master's activities. The master has a large garden of his own. He possesses a quantity of land, and employs laborers to cultivate it. Near the house there are flowering shrubs and masses of flowers growing freely, with ferns among them. Through the garden there flows a streamlet, which forms a little waterfall, and over it a tiny bridge is built. Here he often sits when he is sending out streams of thought and benediction upon his people. It will no doubt appear to the casual observer as though he were sitting idly watching nature and listening heedlessly to the song of the birds and to the splash and tumble of the water. Sometimes, too, he rests in his great armchair, and when his people see him thus, they know that he must not be disturbed. They do not know exactly what he is doing, but suppose him to be in samadhi. The fact that people in the East understand this kind of meditation and respect it may be one of the reasons why the adepts prefer to live there rather than in the West. In this way, we get the effect of the Master sitting quietly for a considerable part of the day, and as we should say, meditating. But while he is apparently resting so calmly, he is in reality engaged all the time in most strenuous labor on higher planes. Strenuous labor. It is strenuous. Manipulating various natural forces and pouring forth influences of the most diverse character on thousands of souls simultaneously, for the adepts are the busiest people in the world. The Master, however, does much physical plane work as well. He has composed some music and has written notes and papers for various purposes. He is also much interested in the growth of physical science, although this is especially the province of one of the other great masters of the wisdom. From time to time, the Master Kuthumi rides on a big bay horse, and occasionally when their work lies together, he is accompanied by the Master Morya, who always rides a magnificent white horse. Our Master regularly visits some of the monasteries and sometimes goes up a great pass to a lonely monastery in the hills. Riding in the course of his duties seems to be his principal exercise, but he sometimes walks with the Master Dwal Kul, who lives in a little cabin which he built with his own hands quite near to the great crag on the way up to the plateau. Sometimes our Master plays on the organ, which is in the large room in his house. He had it made in Tibet under his direction, and it is in fact a combined piano and organ, with a keyboard like those we have in the West, on which he can play all our Western music. It is unlike any other instrument with which I am acquainted, for it is in a sense double-fronted, as it can be played either from the sitting room or the library. The principal keyboard, or rather the three keyboards, great organ, swell, and choir, is in the sitting room, whereas the piano keyboard is in the library. And these keyboards can be used either together or separately. The full organ with its pedals can be played in the ordinary way from the sitting room, but by turning a handle somewhat equivalent to a stop, the piano mechanism can be linked with the organ so that it all plays simultaneously. From that point of view, in fact, the piano is treated as an additional stop on the organ. It's hard to visualize what this thing looks like. From the keyboard in the library, however, the piano can be played alone as a separate instrument, quite disassociated from the organ. But by some complicated mechanism, the choir organ is also linked to that keyboard, so that by it, one can play the piano alone precisely as though it were an ordinary piano, or one can play the piano accompanied by the choir organ, or at any rate by certain stops of that organ. It is also possible, as I said, to separate the two completely, and so, with a performer at each keyboard, to play a piano-organ duet. The mechanism and the pipes of this strange instrument occupy almost the whole of what might be called the upper story of this part of the Master's house. Now this is really the interesting part of the whole thing. By magnetization, he has placed it in communication with the Gandharvas, the Gandharvas or Devas of music, so that whenever it is played, they cooperate, and thus he obtains combinations of sound never to be heard on the physical plane. And there is, too, an effect produced by the organ itself as of an accompaniment of string and wind instruments. The song of the Devas is ever being sung in the world. It is ever sounding in men's ears, but they will not listen to its beauty. There is the deep bourdon of the sea, the sighing of the wind in the trees, the roar of the mountain torrent, the music of stream, river, and waterfall, which together with many others form the mighty song of nature as she lives. This is but the echo in the physical world of a far grander sound, that of the being of the Devas, as is said in Light on the Path. Only fragments of the great song come to your ears while yet you are but man. But if you listen to it, remember it faithfully, so that none which has reached you is lost, and endeavor to learn from it the meaning of the mystery which surrounds you. In time you will need no teacher, for as the individual has voice, so has that in which the individual exists. Life itself has speech and is never silent, and its utterance is not, as you that are deaf may suppose, a cry. It is a song. Learn from it that you are part of the harmony. Learn from it to obey the laws of harmony. So we were told 30 years ago, in the earliest days when I was a part of this organization, about Kuthumi and his great organ, and how he plays that organ to heal, comfort, and send compassion to the world, to really bring the whole planet into a resonance of beauty, of the great music that he produces. And then, of course, with the devas, playing the music or singing with it, it must be a sound so celestial that we can hardly wait to be in some chamber that is celestial without losing our place on earth. Every morning, a number of people, not exactly pupils but followers, come to Kuthumi's house and sit on the veranda and outside it. Sometimes he gives them a little talk, a sort of lecturette, but often he goes on with his work and takes no notice of them beyond a friendly smile with which they seem equally contented. They evidently come to sit in his aura and venerate him. Sometimes he takes his food in their presence, sitting on the veranda with this crowd of Tibetans, and others on the ground around him, but generally he eats by himself at a table in his room. It is possible that he keeps the rule of the Buddhist monks and takes no food after noon. For I do not remember ever to have seen him eat in the evening. It is even possible that he does not need food every day. Most probably when he feels inclined, he orders the food that he would like and does not take his meals at stated times. I have seen him eating little round cakes, brown and sweet. They are made of wheat and sugar and butter, and are of the ordinary kind used in the household cooked by his sister. He also eats curry and rice, the curry being somewhat in the form of soup like dal. He uses a curious and beautiful golden spoon with an exquisite image of an elephant at the end of the handle, the bowl of which is set at an unusual angle to the stem. It is a family heirloom, very old and probably of great value. He generally wears white clothes, but I do not remember ever having seen him wearing a headdress of any kind, except on the rare occasions when he assumes the yellow robe of the Gelugpa sect or clan, which includes a hood somewhat of the shape of the Roman helmet. The Master Morya, however, generally wears a turban. Other houses. The house of the Master Morya is on the opposite side of the valley, but much lower down, quite close, in fact, to the little temple and the entrance to the caves. It is of an entirely different style of architecture, having at least 2 stories, and the front facing the road has verandas at each level which are almost entirely glassed in. The general method and arrangement of his life is much the same as that already described in the case of the Master Kuthumi. If we walk up the road on the left bank of the stream, rising gradually along the side of the valley, we pass on the right the house and grounds of the Master Kuthumi, and further up the hill we find on the same side of the road a small hut or cabin which he who is now the Master Dwalkul constructed for himself with his own hands in the days of his pupilage, in order that he might have an abiding place quite near to his master. In that cabin hangs a sort of plaque upon which, at his request, one of the English pupils of the Master Kuthumi precipitated many years ago an interior view of the larger room in the house of the Master Kuthumi, showing the figures of various masters and pupils. This was done in commemoration of a certain especially happy and fruitful evening at the Master's house. The first ray adepts. Turning now to a consideration of the personal appearance of these great ones, that is modified to some extent by the ray or type to which each of them belongs. The first ray has power for its most prominent characteristic, and those who are born upon it are the kings, the rulers, the governors of the world, of the inner and spiritual world in the first place, but also of the physical plane. Any man who possesses in a very unusual degree the qualities which enable him to dominate men and to guide them smoothly along the course which he desires is likely to be either a first-ray man or one who is tending towards the first ray. Such a kingly figure is the Lord Vivasvata Manu, the ruler of the fifth root race, who is the tallest of all the adepts, being 6 feet 8 inches in height and perfectly proportioned. He is the representative man of our race, its prototype, and every member of that race is directly descended from him. The Manu has a very striking face of great power, with an aquiline nose, a full and flowing brown beard, brown eyes, and a magnificent head of leonine poise. Tall is he, says Dr. Besant, and of king-like majesty, with eyes piercing as an eagle's, tawny and brilliant with golden lights. He is living at present in the Himalayan mountains, not far from the house of his great brother, the Lord Maitreya. Such a figure also is the Master Morya, the lieutenant and successor of the Lord Vivasvata Manu and the future Manu of the sixth root race. So now we understand where El Morya is going in the cosmic peerage. He is a Rajput king by birth and has a dark beard divided into two parts, dark almost black, hair falling to his shoulders, and dark and piercing eyes full of power. He is 6 feet 6 inches in height and bears himself like a soldier, speaking in short, terse sentences as if he were accustomed to being instantly obeyed. In his presence there is a sense of overwhelming power and strength, and he has an imperial dignity that compels the deepest reverence. Madame Blavatsky has often told us how she met the Master Morya in Hyde Park, London, in the year 1851, when he came over with a number of other Indian princes to attend the first great international exhibition. Strangely enough, I myself, then a little child of 4, saw him also, all unknowing. I can remember being taken to see a gorgeous procession in which, among many other wonders, came a party of richly dressed Indian horsemen. Magnificent horsemen they were, riding steeds as fine, I suppose, as any in the world, and it was only natural that my childish eyes were fixed upon them in great delight, and that they were perhaps to me the finest exhibit of that marvelous and fairy-like show. And even as I watched them pass, as I stood holding my father's hand, one of the tallest of those heroes fixed me with gleaming black eyes, which half frightened me, and yet at the same time filled me with somehow with indescribable happiness and exaltation. He passed with the others, and I saw him no more, yet often the vision of that flashing eye returned to my childish memory. Of course, I knew nothing then of who he was, and I should never have identified him had it not been for a gracious remark which he made to me many years afterwards. Speaking one day in his presence of the earlier days of the Society, I happened to say that the first time I had had the privilege of seeing him in materialized form was on a certain occasion when he came into Madame Blavatsky's room at Adyar for the purpose of giving her strength and issuing certain directions. He himself, who was engaged in conversation with some other adepts, turned sharply upon me and said, "No, that was not the first time. You had seen me before then in my physical body. Do you not remember, as a tiny child, watching the Indian horsemen ride past in Hyde Park? And did you not see how even then I singled you out?" I remembered instantly, of course, and said, "Oh, Master, was that you? But I ought to have known it." I do not mention this incident among the occasions when I have met and spoken with a master, both parties to the interview being in the physical body, because I did not at the time know that great horseman to be the master, and because the evidence of so small a child might well be doubted or discounted. Mr. S. Ramaswamy Iyer, in his account of the experience mentioned in Chapter 1, writes, okay, so this is Ramaswamy's take on this. "I was following the road to the town whence I was assured by people I met on the road I could cross over to Tibet easily in my pilgrim's garb, when I suddenly saw a solitary horseman galloping towards me from the opposite direction. From his tall stature and skill in horsemanship, I thought he was some military officer of the Sikkim Raja. As he approached me, he reined up. I looked at him and recognized him instantly. I was in the awful presence of him, of the same Mahatma, my own revered guru, whom I had seen before in his astral body on the balcony of the Theosophical headquarters. It was he, the Himalayan brother of the ever-memorable night of December last, who had so kindly dropped a letter in answer to one I had given but an hour or so before in a sealed envelope to Madame Blavatsky, whom I had never lost sight of for one moment during the interval. This is these long sentences. Do you want me to read that one again? It was he, the Himalayan brother of the ever memorable night of December last, who had so kindly dropped a letter in answer to one I had given but an hour or so before in a sealed envelope to Madame Blavatsky, whom I had never lost sight of for one moment during the interval. The very same instant saw me prostrated on the ground at his feet. I arose at his command and, leisurely looking into his face, forgot myself entirely in the contemplation of the image I knew so well, having seen his portrait, that in Colonel Olcott's possession, times out of number. I knew not what to say. Joy and reverence tied my tongue. The majesty of his countenance, which seemed to me to be the impersonation of power and thought, held me wrapped in awe. I was at last face to face with the Mahatma of the Himavat, and he was no myth, no creation of the imagination of a medium, as some skeptics had suggested. It was no dream of the night. It was between 9 and 10 o'clock of the forenoon. There was the sun shining and silently witnessing the scene from above. I see him before me in flesh and blood, and he speaks to me in accents of kindness and gentleness. What more could I want? My excess of happiness made me dumb. Nor was it until some time had elapsed that I was able to utter a few words, encouraged by his gentle tone and speech. His complexion is not as fair as that of Mahatma Kuthumi, but never have I seen a countenance so handsome, a stature so tall and so majestic. As in his portrait, he wears a short black beard and long black hair hanging down to his breast. Only his dress was different. Instead of a white loose robe, he wore a yellow mantle lined with fur, and on his head, instead of the turban, a yellow Tibetan felt cap, such as I have seen some Bhutanese wear in this country. When the first moments of rapture and surprise were over, and I calmly comprehended the situation, I had a long talk with him. That is so vivid that I would like you to take yourself to retire, and if you can do so without communicating, entering into the scene, because it is so ultimately real. And when we captivate scenes like this and we enter them, we are there. And you know, you can go back in time or forward in time. You're not stuck when you're out of the body. So you can go back to this moment where this Ramaswamy Iyer gives this account. And you can ask to be taken to the very place where El Morya was riding the steed. And you can literally have a very beautiful inner level experience. I would like to leave this there because I think it's one of the great treasures, the great, great treasures of our association with El Morya. So I would like to take up Maitreya, the Lord. It's Shakshusha Manu and the Mahachohan, and then all of the 7 rays. I don't want the sands in the hourglass or the sands on the page to minimize this very special experience. So with your permission, I would like to conclude at this time so that we realize just how precious all of these teachings are, and they are meant for food. They are our spiritual food. If we digest them, we will be rising to those levels, little by little, of our immortality while we are on earth. So I'm very happy to have begun at the beginning now. And as you could see from the first pages, these people who ran the society in Adyar, they were very concerned to give testimony, factual testimony that they could relay to others. And if they hadn't done this, if they hadn't made an attempt to record every time they had seen a master, talked with a master, or had supernatural things happen to them, we could be sitting here with many challengers to our path, to the adepts and so forth, and would have nothing to offer them that was of the concrete nature that people demand to have when they are entering a path that is not physical in itself. What makes our path physical is the science of the spoken word. And because we use our chakras, chiefly our throat chakra, but all of our chakras, we are drawing down what has been described in this reading, the higher vibrations, the levels of immortality. We're tugging and pulling down our causal body. We're tugging on our I am presence when we have those great moments of rising to a certain level and the Holy Christ Self is one with us. And God draws nigh to us because we are so centered in His vibration that He can come nigh to us and not be injured. God is injured when we are boisterous, when we are jealous, when we have all the human traits that we have from one time or another. And so the scriptures say, draw nigh to me and I will draw nigh to you. So please remember that the spoken word is ethereal. You know, it's spoken, it goes out. Where does it land? It's not a physical thing. When we give decrees, we say the word, and what goes forth is the power of the word, the love of the word, the wisdom of the word, the energy that we pour into the cups of the worded decrees. But the spoken word itself is of another plane. Think about that. Think about that. It's just breath. It's the fire breath of God that passes through us. If someone were to say, what does the spoken word look like? There's really no answer. It's like the soundless sound, or the sound that transcends sound. We send it off, and it transforms the world. Thank you very much for being with us, and to all on the patch, have a good night's sleep, and hopefully it won't be too cold tomorrow. In the name of the light of God that never fails, we call to the great adepts, the ascended masters, now ascended masters, who were arhats, adepts, who have broken the ground, who have carried us through so many civilizations, whom we have known lifetime after lifetime. We are grateful for these moments in time and space and in eternity when we can come together and realize that we are one on many planes of being. Let us remember this and realize that all of us have more to us than what we perceive. We have gifts and attainments that lie dormant. We have profound thoughts that we do not share with others. We have a world of evolution by which we are ascending daily. So God, receive us. We are grateful for this communion, and we ask you, great adepts of the Far East who have been with us for centuries, to intensify and overshadow us as we eliminate truly from ourselves those elements of the human consciousness that are an offense to the ascended masters and to the adepts. So God, teach us daily to strip ourselves of the not-self and to recognize that our higher self lives within us. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Divine Mother. Amen. Amen. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Mother. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
The preceding lecture was given by Elizabeth Clare Prophet, world-renowned author and spiritual teacher. The Summit Lighthouse is an international spiritual organization dedicated to universal enlightenment. Founded in 1958, the Summit Lighthouse has been a beacon of truth to thousands worldwide and a leader in New Thought spirituality. The preceding program has been brought to you by the Summit Lighthouse. For more information, call 1-800-245-5445 or visit our website at www.tsl.org. Outside the USA, call 406-848-9500 or write to the Summit Lighthouse, 63 Summit Way, Gardner, Montana, 59030 USA.